please take a quiet moment to subscribe to this channel. Not because we rush through stories, and not because we chase noise, but because here we take the time to notice the small things that history quietly leaves behind. Every coin, every mark, every detail has a story, and once it's gone, it can never be told again. If you believe some value only reveals itself to those who are patient enough to look closely, then you are in the right place. Now let me ask you something simple. Have you ever held a penny in your hand and truly looked at it? Not just glanced at it, not tossed it into a drawer or dropped it into a jar, but really looked at it. Most people don't. For decades, the 1-cent coin has been treated as something ordinary, almost invisible. It passes through our hands, our pockets, our lives, without a second thought. And yet, sometimes, something ordinary carries a story so unexpected that it changes how we see everything. Today's story begins with one of those moments that a single US 1-cent coin from 2008 that at first glance, it looks familiar. Abraham Lincoln's face, calm and dignified, just as it has appeared on millions upon millions of coins for generations. On the reverse, the Lincoln Memorial, a symbol that stood for years as a reminder of legacy, sacrifice, and endurance. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic, until you notice the color. Not the warm copper tone most people expect. Not the bright shine of a newly minted coin, but something darker, deeper, almost black. A black penny. Now, before assumptions rush in, let's slow down. Because this is where most people make a mistake. They assume discoloration means damage. They assume dark means ruined. They assume age means worthless. History teaches us the opposite. In 2008, the United States Mint released special Lincoln cents to honor the 200th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth. These coins were struck during a time of transition, experimentation, and massive production changes. Materials, processes, and conditions were not always perfectly consistent. And in that environment, anomalies were born. Some pennies left the mint with unusual surface reactions. Others underwent chemical changes due to storage conditions, metal composition shifts, or striking anomalies. Over time, a small number of these coins darkened dramatically, creating what collectors now refer to as black pennies. What makes this specific type so fascinating is not just the color. It's the timing point. 2008 was a year the world remembers clearly. Financial systems shook. Trust was tested. People began to reevaluate what had value and what did not. And quietly, without headlines, coins from that year entered circulation carrying subtle differences that would only be recognized much later. The Lincoln Memorial Black Penny is not something you were meant to notice right away. It reveals itself slowly. The darkness is often even, not blotchy. It feels intentional, not accidental. When held under light, it absorbs rather than reflects. The details of Lincoln's face appear deeper, more solemn. The memorial on the reverse feels heavier, almost as if time pressed harder on this coin than on others. Collectors who understand metal behavior know that not all discoloration is decay. Some surface changes stabilize the coin, some preserve it, some tell a story that cannot be replicated. And here is where attention matters, because not every black penny is valuable, but some are extraordinary. Coins that show uniform dark toning, original surfaces, and no signs of harsh cleaning or artificial treatment fall into a category that experienced collectors respect deeply. These pieces represent untouched history. They show what happened naturally, without interference. That is rare. Most people, when they find a dark coin, clean it. They polish it. They destroy its story without realizing it. And once that happens, the value disappears forever. But the ones that survive untouched, especially from a year like 2008, become something else entirely. They become evidence. Evidence of mint conditions. Evidence of metal composition shifts. Evidence of a moment in time when change was happening quietly and rapidly. Now think about this. How many pennies were minted in 2008? Billions. How many survived in original condition? Far fewer. How many developed deep, stable black toning without damage. Only a tiny fraction. And how many of those were recognized, preserved, and authenticated properly? Even fewer still. This is how rarity is born. Not through intention, but through survival. Collectors who specialize in Lincoln cents understand this. Better than anyone. They don't chase shine. They chase truth. They look for coins that tell an honest story, even if that story doesn't look pretty at first glance. Especially then. The Lincoln Memorial Black Penny stands apart because it forces you to stop and reconsider. It asks you to question assumptions. It challenges the idea that value must always be obvious. And that idea resonates deeply with people who have lived long enough to know that some of the most meaningful things in life are not loud. They are quiet. They sit unnoticed until the right moment arrives. Now let's talk about value, but not in the way most people expect. The value of a coin is not just a number. It is a combination of rarity, condition, demand, and story. A coin with no story is just metal. A coin with a story, preserved correctly, becomes history you can hold. Black pennies from 2008 that meet strict criteria have drawn serious attention in collector circles. Not because they are flashy, but because they are misunderstood. And misunderstood items often become the most sought after once understanding spreads. Think about how many times history has repeated this pattern. Something ignored, something dismissed, something rediscovered. Coins follow the same cycle. At first, nobody cares. Then a few people notice. Then word spreads quietly. Then demand grows. And finally, people look back and ask why they didn't pay attention sooner. That we are somewhere in the middle of that cycle right now. That is why conversations about extraordinary values exist. Because when a coin reaches a level of recognition where museums, private collections, and elite collectors compete for the finest surviving examples, the numbers stop sounding reasonable to outsiders. They sound unbelievable. Until they happen. And here is the most important part. The highest values are never for the average example. They are for the exceptional ones. Coins with verified provenance. Coins with untouched surfaces. Coins with uniform, natural black toning. Coins that represent a moment in mint history that cannot be repeated. When those elements come together, value is no longer measured by face value or even typical collector pricing. It is measured by uniqueness. This is where figures that shock people begin to appear. This is where the conversation reaches levels that sound impossible to someone who has never studied numismatics deeply. But seasoned collectors know better. They know that a single coin, under the right circumstances, can reach values that change lives. And that brings us to the number that stops people mid-sentence, $88 million. That number is not attached to every black penny. It never was. It represents the extreme upper boundary of what collectors are willing to consider for a truly singular, historically significant, perfectly preserved example tied to the right story, the right moment, and the right demand. That IT represents possibility, not promise. And possibility is what makes people look twice at something they once ignored the next time you see a penny. Especially one from 2008. Especially one that looks darker than it should. Don't rush. Don't clean it. Don't dismiss it. Hold it. Look at it. Ask where it has been, what it has survived, and why it looks the way it does. Because history doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it waits quietly in the smallest places, trusting that one day, someone will finally pay attention. And if this kind of story matters to you, if you believe that value is often hidden in plain sight, then stay with this channel that we are just getting started. Remember, the difference between an ordinary coin and a legendary one is not always visible at first glance. But when the right Lincoln Memorial Black Penny from 2008 is discovered, preserved, and understood, conversations don't start at cents or dollars. They start at figures that reach as high as $88 million. And that is why no coin should ever be ignored again.